Yeah. Okay, we're going to do this in English because our host is English. Oh, it's American. Someone is there.
Sorry, one more.
Okay.
Sorry for very late.
Paul, thank you for having us.
You're welcome.
Because I think for everybody this is really an experience, and everybody's really, excited to be here.
Yes.
So big thank you for having us. Welcome at another event of Peer Currents. I don't know at what number we are yet, but we are 1 week and 1 day running around the city doing all these events. And Peer Currents is an event we came up 2 years ago to bring more content, art and culture to the Pride Week. And well, there is no Pride Week, but we could do Peer Currents because we were allowed to have like 30 people in the room, and we have less than 30 people in the room now, so that's good. So we started in December to make a program, and then in January we were ready, and then slowly COVID came, and so we had to stop. And in April 17th we decided to do it. So here we are, and we had some amazing talks and events already. It was, yeah, I'm really at the moment, because I think of COVID, very open, so everything comes in totally. And we had some moving talks, and so it's very special. And I'm also very grateful that we can be here, because for me this was really, we were here like 1 month ago, and Paul was like, really, okay, let's do this. And everybody around the house was saying, oh, this will be very difficult. And I think it's really, really special, and especially also the whole story, what happens between the death of Frans Haks, the Rijksmuseum, the Rijksmuseum selling it, a new owner who wanted to destroy everything. Then, of course, it didn't happen, and it became a monument. And then you came in, and I think that's the great part here, that you're so dedicated to the space and to bring it back to the original state, and with all the love and care you want to give it. So I'm grateful that we are here. And then we go back to Dirk. And thank you, Dirk, for doing this for the second time. Last year was already amazing, talking about queer architecture and how queer can it be. So when the two of us came here, like we went together for the first time, and Dirk is, well, I think everybody knows Dirk, but he was like really like, it's so nice to be here and to have the event here. So I give the room to you, the floor to you, but first I think we're going to reveal.
Yeah, reveal. It's like a tease.
So thank you for coming. As Queer Currents is a little bit supported by the city of Amsterdam, and maybe a little bit supported by someone else, you can, if you want to, scan this on your phone and donate like 2 cents or 3 cents, whatever is in your wallet. Yes, thank you. It's outside there. Here.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you to our gracious hosts for having us here. Yeah, just it's a little bit teasing.
Show master.
But after the conversation, we can read a little bit. So, voila. And of course, it's not only going up to the light, there's also this very special bathtub there, which we can speculate on what was imagining there. It's definitely one of the special items of the interior. Okay. Okay. sorry for the noise. What we wanted to do was just first have a presentation, and then have a conversation, and then we can mingle and look around and there's even drinks. So I try to be as concise as possible and not to be academic. It's part of ongoing research that I started now really 5 years ago or so, I think. Basically out of annoyance and irritation with that in Holland, in the Netherlands, and certainly in Delft and in Rotterdam, there was very little attention to queer architecture, or let's say other kinds of architecture. It was all very much cloaked in universalism, and architecture is for everybody, housing is for everybody, blah, 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 blah. But a specific user, who is really the user, all sorts of different ways of using space, that was never really addressed. And somehow as a gay person, but I assume also as anyone of the LGBT family, you felt somehow marginalized in that architecture discourse in the Netherlands. At least that was my feeling. So basically what I started to do was, well, I can sit on my couch and be really annoyed all the time. Let's just start doing something about it and have a look at what's there in the archive, what things are there to discover. And it's very good that we have started this because all sorts of new discoveries are coming up. So, and there's lots of more stories to tell than I expected in the beginning. And it's very important also to team up with everybody, because together there are many more stories, I think. So for instance, at the Institute, this is the new institute in Rotterdam, where the National Archive of Architecture and Planning is. And the great thing is that Alfred Marx is there, and he knows this archive almost by heart. And so we started to do queering architecture events, and he came up with sort of revelation, so to speak. For instance, Cor is here, who's doing the queer bike tours, and he also has amazing amount of stories that no one really knows about, or some people know about. And today already you did one tour in Slotermeer. Last year or 2 years ago we did that too. And it's a modernist district. So the funny title is How Queer is Slotermeer? And of course the idea is that Slotermeer is totally not queer at all. But then Cor comes with a lot of stories that there are all sorts of layers and things to tell and know about. And you will do another tour in Belmermeer and one in Buitenveldert. So it's really nice that you leave the inner city, I think, and go to these modernist districts to bring out these stories. Martin is there too, Martin van Wijk, student at the UvA, architecture history, who is going to write a thesis, or is writing a thesis on queer architecture. I think there's a little group of people bringing this all out, which I really like, because there's so many stories to tell. So for today, it's very different from last year, because last year was a bit of what is queer architecture. You can talk endlessly about what is queer architecture. My approach is very simple. If there's anything that's slightly queer about a building, it's queer architecture. So for instance, with concrete architecture, any concrete building can be categorized as concrete architecture. Any Dutch building can be categorized as Dutch architecture. But with queer architecture, people start to make trouble and say, that's something queer, why not? And so if there's a queer client, a queer designer, a queer use, for me that's a flag to say, okay, let's look at what's happening there. And why are queer users there? Why do they use it? How do they use it? Why are they queer clients? How they work with an architect, etc. Because as we are here, this is a queer client. I don't think Mendini was queer, to be honest. He had a family and children, but he might have had a queer way of working. But Frans Haks was absolutely No. Here he is. One of the famous photos, Alberto Ferrero photo. And in this rediscovery of the interior, these photos were circulated again. So there were a few items on the online. Indeed, I said, Gijs, look what's this? We have to use this for our Queer Currents event. Frans Haks, also a very controversial figure, of course. Always lots of fights with the city of Groningen. There are a few films and documentaries about it. So this is also, I'm not really a specialist on Frans Haks and Mendini, so if you have stories to share, please be my guest. It'd be very interesting to hear. But he made it happen, and he made this reality, this interior. So that in the photo shoot, it's of course very glamorous and yeah, it's almost like a film set. And it's of course very much related to the famous museum in Groningen, where you now can go to the Mondo Mendini show, which is still on, June, August. You can also visit it online, I noticed myself. So you can just go with 3D camera there. And it's a very interesting building because it's not one author. One of the things that Mendini decided was to work with many architects, with Lucky, with Koop Himmelblauw, and with Philip Stark. And I had forgotten it, but the Golden Tower is there, of course. It's a classic Italian theme, I think, because the Fondazione Prada hired Rem Koolhaas to do a Golden Tower for their museum. But Groningen was much earlier than Prada. Okay, moving on. The exhibition is interesting because it has a lot of references to art that Mendini apparently liked and had an affinity with. And it's not just postmodernism, but it's all sorts of stuff. It's also Malevich, it's also the style, it's also constructivism, it's also Italian futurism. Lots from the pointillism is another inspiration. So him not being queer, as a designer, it's hard to say he's not queer because there are some, let's say, queer sensibility. I don't know if that's a real thing, a queer sensibility, but let's try it out. The chair is named after Marcel Proust, after all, and Proust is of course the gay icon from French modern literature. I don't know why he called it Proust, but it's what is important to mention for now, I think, and also when looking at this interior, and this will be different from the other things that I will show, is because it so clearly belongs to postmodernism. It's very much, when you think of queer sensibilities, you can think of surface, an interest in surface, the totally over-the-top use of color, a new interest in form, in formality, formalisms, and playing with formalisms, and eclecticism. And this is very different, of course, from the Dutch tradition, which is so dominated by modernism. And the queer guys I will show you from Amsterdam, they are absolute modernists. So the queer sensibility is not, you cannot relate it to one single style. It's not a style, definitely not. But it is working with established styles in the history of architecture. Now, because I work mostly with the archive, it is historical presentations. There are also a lot of things to say about queer architecture today, because it's much easier to be open as a queer architect today, even though there are not so many still. For instance, last year, I was also very interested to talk with Mark Keuler, who talked also at another event. Was he talking at Queer Currents? I don't know, but there was also a BNA Pride lunch, the Dutch Architects Association. And he said, well, I don't say to my clients that I'm queer, only after the contracts are signed. It's a nice joke, but I think it shows how in the world of money and business, all sorts of different things, you better not put them up front. Anyway, a few things from the archive. We have drawings and other materials in our archive because it was actually built by Mart van Schijngel, the architect who also did a little postmodernist building at Rokin, and who you might know of this triangular glass vase. He died very young, also around 2000, I think. But because we have his archive in Rotterdam, we also have the drawings from the Casa Haks. So I'll show you a few studies, sketches for the door, a mask or a filter. You came through it, so it's from the outside. It's not so conspicuous. It's not. I think this is one of the theses that I want to put to you today. It's a strategic thing to do, to hide, to cover the queer identity from the outside. Because on the inside, of course, there is this explosion of otherness. So these drawings are very interesting because they show there's an idea of projections here, some sort of bed. I don't know if it really happened at some point because it's an in-between phase, I think, because yeah. Oh, here's the thing. Okay. Sorry. So here you see that the hallway is slightly different from what is today. And another queer thing I would like to point out is that there are two entrances. And this was also one of the controversies from Groningen, where Frans Haks and his partner were harassed, I would say, by city council administrators, because they somehow made a sort of tax deal because they lived in a house with two apartments, so they could have a tax something exemption, but at the same time they had one household, and this was used as them being fraudulent, I think, and was made into a public thing. But here, still you have two, it's still there, of course, so there's a door, and that where Gijs is standing, there's a stair going up to the apartment above here, which is, let's say, more normal. So it functions it has really different worlds inside one world.
That was the husband's house upstairs. This was
Yeah,
I mean, that's what they said.
shared.
That's what they said.
Yeah, that's also a bit for the outer world, I think. I'm not so sure if this was really the domain of France and he would never go up. Sure. So these are some drawings from going up and this fantastic theatrical stair, of course. This is for the architects of Mars. This is a feature, the Colonna Bagno. I don't think it ever happened. And some studies for the theatrical decor and devices. It's nice to look at it. Yeah. Now, so I thought it's good to bring a few queer spaces from Amsterdam. All of a sudden it hit me that the architects we were looking at are all in Amsterdam, which is not a surprise, of course. But I never realized it was also a local thing, because with the queer theory we look very much to America, where it's a big thing, or England, and less on the continent. On the continent it's not so, in Europe it's not so outspoken, I would say. This is Benno Premsla's house, of course, at the Keizersgracht, which was a famous meeting place for designers, people from the world of culture, artists, etc. And that's the famous table where he and his partner Friso Broeksma would entertain all sorts of guests. I forgot the name of the guy who did
The sofa.
the sofa.
It's the father of.
Yeah, I'm also thinking about it. It's really bad.
Graansma.
Graansma, yeah, Graansma and Slot. Yeah. Is Benno. But I would say that this interior, even though it's modernist, is also eclectic in its way, bringing together all sorts of artworks, design elements. So this is already, this is not quite like the Stijl, for instance. But here again, there's a very modest canal facade, the Keizersgracht. And when you look at the drawings, but also how it's staged, how you enter, there's a way of sequencing and filtering before you enter that special space, which is a safe space for the community of friends and of Bernd Bremselaar and Frits Hoeksma. So this was an art piece by Carl André, and you had to walk over it, of course. It was so in any museum you would not be allowed to walk over it. But here, indeed, you have to cross it, so it's like a liminal space. A riet passage, almost too informally. But then you go up the stairs, and then almost coming from behind the stage set, you can enter that special room where you will be entertained. And this is a photo with the door open to another place, the bedroom. Normally it would be closed. And then we enter this room with a view on the canal, and then again in this room. And because it was such a stark minimalist, modernist space, which was then special, designed by Frits Hoeksma, I think it was meant to be what we now call a safe space, a queer space. Another designer, architect, who is not so well known, being a gay architect, is Onno Greiner. Onno Greiner is very well known for designing theaters. He did a lot of renovations, extensions at the Carré Theater. But you might know the Flint in Amersfoort, which is a famous Dutch theater cultural center. This is him in his house. It's one of the few photos which are stylized. A little bit, I had to think of the Tom Ford movie, A Single Man. It's not as beautiful as California in the Laudner house, where that film was shot, of course. But especially the way the lamp is in position. But there are other things too. Look, for instance, at the texture of the walls. So this is the 60s. He designed it in 61. It was done in 68. And it was for him. He was a single man.
Do you know where it was?
Yeah, here it comes. It was in Amstelveen. And it's so this is ongoing work, so I'm getting totally paranoid about how many queer spaces there are, really. But so these are patio houses, and again, very anonymous to the street, very private. And it was part of a bigger scheme. The Laan Rosenberg. So here you see all these little black things. There's a drawing, maybe not so well, not so obvious to see, but it's all cluster of all sorts of patio houses. And in the archive, they are all designed for single men. So I'm really wondering what's happening here. Is this a little gay community, or like the Fire Iron Pines? You know? Because also you also have a story about Buitenveld, and Buitenveld was a nice, quiet, anonymous place for gay people to live there.
Yeah. How about the other architects? Did they all design their own spaces, or are the others not living in the complex?
I have still to find this out. What happened? He designed at least 3 of those houses. I don't know if he designed the whole strip, and I don't know the current state of those houses.
They're still there, or they're?
I think so, yeah. They're private houses, so. We can go there tomorrow. After that talk, yeah. So you see how it's completely introverted around the patio. It's a classic modernist typology, but again, a modernist typology known for transparency, known for, let's say, a fresh, heterosexual, healthy way of living. It's used for a different way of living, a different life pattern. And here you see how anonymous it really is. And the interesting thing is that this is also something that I have to think of. There's an extension at the front. This is this little sketch with a second entrance, and it's a whole separate living unit, as if a partner moves in, or maybe an aging mother. It's also possible. But there's some, again, talking about different ways of living, queer households, or this is very interesting too, I find. So it's very different. Yeah, I'm an architect, so I look at house typologies, which are templates for lifestyles. And architecture is really ruthless in that sense. Where the kitchen goes, where the door entrance is, where the bedrooms are, etc. Now, this is something that Martin mentioned to me. You have to look at Wind and Boom too. Alfred also pointed him out because of this photo album. He's an interior designer, interior architect. He did also a few, quite a few private houses. But Alfred made him part of our peer project because he traveled a lot and he made an immense amount of photos of himself in classic gay style. These are the decent ones. There are also nude pictures. And of course, there's well, I will say a little bit maybe about it at the end. With all these houses, there's a whole story of regret and loss and having to work against the dominant culture. So it says, for the ones who don't speak English, the decent lies of the official
Decency.
The pretty lies of official decency, decent words. But he also made in the 60s fantasy houses, and he was a real modernist. He worked at Rietveld, he also worked with the Van den Broek and Wagner office. He worked with the Stichting Goed Wonen, a foundation Good Living, which would tell people how to live and start modernist spaces. He worked with Stoller, who would work on socialist projects. And then all of a sudden there's this idea of fantasy houses, which is weird in Dutch modern tradition, because fantasy is of course way too light-hearted and not serious. But we have in the archive various of these exercises, like this one. It's a narrow house, a smaller house, beautiful model, between 60 and 66. And it's quite mad how you have to walk to the bed for a bedroom, for instance. With a drawing like this is, of course, a really beautiful drawing. And these interior views. There are some more of these models. So what are these houses? Is this a form of escapism? Is this a gay utopia, a safe space? I don't know. This is a holiday home for the island of Elba that he designed. And again, you can see how close all of these houses are, and then at some points they open up. This is Dick van Woerkom. Dick van Woerkom is also very interesting. He lived in the Heintje Hoeksteeg, not so far away from here. He was an architect, also worked actually with Wim de Boom. And he was one of the founders of the current state archive. So in the 70s, he devoted his career to the building of the architecture archive that we have now in Rotterdam. And he himself started also doing what we call the paper architecture fantasy houses. Maybe a bit of history. He worked with artists, Jos Balieu in particular, kind of nailed the style project, being more the style than the style ever was. So again, I think a very purist and strict person. Just like Emsela, just like De Boom, and like Greiner. the model is by Balieu, the drawing is by Van Voorkom. Yes, just taking it in. And this is one of the beautiful models that we have in the archive. I have no idea what he would say if he would say, "Oh, this is queer architecture." I think he used this universalism as a strategy, this abstraction, to create his own world that he could also inhabit and appropriate. So, but we have a set of these kind of it's dreamy-like modernist project. So this is a house and photo studio for a guy named Frank den Oudsten. If you know who it is, please let me know. There are many drawings for Frank den Oudsten, so I would, so who is that? A photographer apparently. But there's also many other things. This is then an abstract house. This is a house. This is to show how queering works a little bit in the archive also. A house for an average family is called, with 2 children. So here is the plan. The plan is always the key to the system of control. Architecture is a system of control, as you know. It's not an average family, right? No average family has 4 bathrooms. And so there's another plan here. The house, this is a house for an art collector. It looks very similar. Art collector. It's, I don't know, it could be very straight art collector. Other things are happening here. Let's say it's not a heterosexual house anymore. And then there's a house for a musician. And this is again for Frank den Oudsten. And this is also inspired by what happened in America. Not so much Horace Gifford, who did all those beautiful House in Fire Island, but more by the New York Five, people like Heuvel, Peter Eisenman. And they also developed a sort of autonomous, Richard Meyer was also one of them, kind of autonomous architecture, very much influenced by Rietveld and de Stijl. I mean, it's completely rip-off, so to speak, and then further developed. And this is then coming back to the Netherlands, and Dirk van Voorkom also doing these exercises. But yeah, again, this is not a normal house, the way you circulate fluids. And this is one of my favorites. And it has an English name, the Red Yellow House. I don't know why it's all of a sudden English, but there's an international connection. There are many sad stories I said around these people. One of the sad stories around Dirk van Voorkom is that he wanted to bring his lover from Tunisia after he brought a first lover from North Africa, who then went off. And because the first one wasn't a success, the migrant department, I don't know what was called in those days, they wouldn't allow him to bring him over. So there's a very sad letter to Queen Juliana appealing to have some sort of leniency to bring his partner over. And with more of those letters. So with Onno Kreiner, this is one of the things with queering the archives, trying to find out who are these guys really. There's a set of letters that's all from the office, and there's a set of letters which are marked private. And apparently they weren't meant to be part of our archive. And the private letter is a very sad love letter. It's really to a person who, well, it didn't work out in the end. So, but then, of course, you have, it's silly to say, but then you have the real proof. Because in the queer theory, queer history discourse, it's very important that you need to have some sort of proof or, what is the evidence of all these secret lifestyles? And that's also in our archive. This is his own studio house, Dirk van Voorkom. And it's many houses brought together into one house, I would say. So in one part of the house, he's a musician playing the piano. In another part, he has a fancy car. In another part, he has this beautiful bathroom. And then you see also these stairs coming together. So, and there are these drawings. So it's like a system, but perverted maybe to fit his own wishes and desires. So it becomes an aesthetic of its own. And these are models made by students from Eindhoven. This is the last one, and here again lots of color. But this is, I would say, also again a mask or a filter, something that does not quite tell you what's happening behind it or inside the house. At some point I thought, so it's I think it's very ambivalent, but maybe you also just let me know what you think. I think it's also a paranoia, but this was also only something that I started to think of when putting this together yesterday, this morning, because these spaces are strange. They are spaces of freedom, all sorts of fantastic, rich spatial relationships, lot of spaces, lots of uses. But it's also a labyrinth, and it's also a way of hiding. So to me, there are also these kind of things. So there's also always, also in the case of Bremselaar and Broeksma, I just go back now, I think there's also a little paranoia there. Maybe here too in this space. I don't know. A celebration of your own desire, and but also not quite, and also unfulfilled desires a lot. So go back.
Excuse me, but how do you mean unfulfilled desires?
Oh, for instance, in Linden Boom, this was never built. There was never a really free life. So I don't know the legal situation for gays in the Netherlands, but yeah, up to the 70s it was very difficult. And also with the Bremselaar house was also a house where, yeah, there's a beautiful book made about the house where there was the fight for emancipation. Young gay guys who were thrown out of house, they would find a safe place through, for instance, Bernard Bremselaar's help and support. So in that sense, they are curated and filtered spaces, safe spaces. But I think the anxiety that is there in society is also there. That's my speculation for today.
Dirk, in terms of speculation, did you ever find references to La Petite Maison, the book by the Bastide?
No, I don't know it.
It's a late 18th century, and it's a small book, beautiful floor plans of houses. It's kind of a genre of libertine novels in which men, usually of wealth, seduce young women. And it's not like you read it. It's like, but it has these elaborate floor plans, and it has this like it's not really happening, but it is happening to make it kind of like a fantasy world, but as real as possible.
There's a tradition in architecture where you have these fantasies and how it really, and then it would be very interesting to relate it to the codes and of society. And what's allowed, what's not allowed. I didn't find any connection there. No. So this is basically my story for today. Maybe you have questions or you want to add. Or...
What year was
partnership of same-sex partnerships made legal in the Netherlands or recognized?
2001.
That's the partnership.
Yeah.
Americans
No,
do a lot of
that's
partnerships.
marriage.
Yeah, but
Partnerships in 1998.
partnerships were in 1998. I wonder there's probably a certain paranoia built into building these separate units in this house too, because you can never really trust the society or the government to allow you to keep to recognize. But when they built this, it was recognized their partnership, but maybe they had been through, they had fought in the trenches, so they knew that it could be taken away. Might have that kind of paranoia. You keep your own spaces because you don't really believe yet that society accepts you as a family unit. So you create these separate units because that's just what you're used to and what you can always fall back on.
It's speculation.
But in case of this house, also remember that Hux and his partner had very different tastes, right?
Yeah.
Because Hux was obviously very modern, and his husband was a specialist in Biedermeier, I think. Or something.
That's a consequence.
And I think Hux also enjoyed that, but didn't really.
Yeah, they were also two characters, definitely. I think that's also part of it. Yeah, I don't want to reduce it now to the paranoia. It would be not be a good idea.
One thing that you mentioned of the projections, I think that Hux had decided that he didn't want art anymore, and he was photographing all his art so that he could do it away, and he was projecting. Yeah, sort of like he thought it was tacky to have stuff on the wall.
Tacky,
Yeah.
Yeah, this one, yeah. That's cool. Yeah.
Did you come across in your search camp at all? Because camp is something that's always been associated with days.
Yeah, of course, there's lots of. I didn't put it on here. Yes, there's a whole history of camp, of course. But what is camp really? I mean, it's sometimes very hard to see what is camp and what's not. So, for instance, the house of Horace Walpole in England. With today's eyes, you might look at it as camp, but I don't think he mentioned it as camp. Although there is a hyperbolic gesture in almost every detail. But you find it with postmodernism. When postmodernism comes is on the rise, camp is definitely an issue is being discussed. So Charles Jenks, a historian of postmodernism architecture, is the first also to point out gay architecture. He talks about gay eclecticists, but he devotes only one page to it, and then he moves on to what he calls the straight revivalists. I have no idea how he meant what he mentioned really there, if he was not happy to talk too much about the gays, or whether it was a swipe at the straights. But he talks about camp. But it's very much about camp, and then it becomes unserious. So it's all innuendo and double coding, etc. Which is interesting. But it's by Jenks it becomes a formula, I would say. I'm not sure if it's. I'm not a fan of Jenks, so I must be careful. I'm not really objective there. And I don't think with the Dutch modernists there's any camp at all. I don't know. I didn't know any of these guys. Absolutely. Other things.
You come across older examples. You started at a very specific point in architectural history.
That's a very good question. I don't know. So there's we don't know that much of Dutch history. It's really like a black hole in Dutch. So in America, it's just a real big discourse on gay architects and. Well, the one thing first to say is, of course, it's very much male-dominated, which has to do with male privilege, I suppose. So in all those this intersectional way, who has what sort of ability to build something. The gay males are dominant, and some of them are pretty conservative. even though they built progressive architecture, so someone like Philip Johnson he was a Nazi. He was flirting with Nazism in the 30s, went to rallies of the Nazis, and at the same time in the 50s, then he built the glass house, which is now cherished as the ultimate gay, queer space to go. It's also curated in that way by the Philip Johnson Foundation. And he was, I think that this is a nice story. It's totally not, I don't know if it's true, but he, for instance, also came to Holland and he pushed the work of the Dutch architect out. And I think he had a crush on Out. Because there's all these letters of friendship, blah, blah, blah. And, I don't think it was reciprocated. Out was suffering from depression.
But,
He was not happy. He wasn't out. He was down. He was out. There's all these tons of speculation. But it's fun to go through the archives and try to be like a detective. What is that? What does that mean? What could that be?
Paul, is there anything you want to share with us living here?
Well, I can tell you that this is probably one of the good examples of what we want to do with the space. So we're hoping to actually throw events. The idea behind when we were lucky enough to get the offer accepted, that we were excited to be able to use it for workshops and doing like talking events and stuff like this. So hopefully this is the first one. So thank you all also for making.
And you did already some restorations.
Upstairs, yeah, it was, to be nice, it was a hot mess. So upstairs needed a complete renovation. It was in pretty bad shape. So we gutted it and then we did add some color and stuff to kind of have it flow into the living area up above, because having this as exotic as it is, it's just, I don't know if I would keep my sanity having that the same way where I sleep. So maybe I do share some of the bifurcation of the way they used to live here. Or you have this as like the fun and creative space, and then upstairs is a little bit more normalized.
When did you buy this?
When did we get it? It was November of last year, and then we started the renovations. I was living around, I've lived in Newmark my whole time in Amsterdam. We were living around the corner, and so it took about 3 months to get the upstairs done. And then we did a little bit of time here, but really it was just cleaning this part. It was very filthy, not being occupied for 2 years. Yeah, there was some.
Who lived here before?
Nobody. So after the two passed away. Before that, I don't know.
Well, it was a fisherman.
Was it? No.
What are the fish things here?
They had Jacob that was
Oh,
here.
it was, yeah, I remember the story. Before those guys, it was the whole house. It was it was a family house, the whole house. Yeah, and they sell it for really small money to the guys who made it Mendini. Yeah, and before that, it was also fisherman. Yeah,
They used to sell fishing supplies or something like that.
And they kept the storage because it's here.
Yeah. And then they built all these racks and stuff in there too. So it's great for us for, I don't know, I do electronics and hobby kits. That's good for organizing things.
And is there anything known how Hux wanted to, did he want to stay it like this? Or what was his
I don't know. I can't speak on that, but I could say that, I mean, they would have left it to the Rijksmuseum otherwise if they didn't want to have it held to some preservation. So I think it was actually, it's sad to say that somebody wanted to come in and then turn it into a half garage and an apartment again, especially seeing this as it was. And then I'm happy that Monumenten specialists stepped in and said no.
Yeah.
What is the story about that Hux? They left it to the Rijksmuseum and the Rijksmuseum just sold it. They didn't want to have
Yes,
it.
well, what's that? I don't know. Okay, we don't know.
Someone said that it was allowed to sell it.
Yeah, I think een stukje that the Rijksmuseum could sell it on if they didn't want to have it. I don't think he intended the Rijksmuseum to keep it if they didn't want to.
Okay.
And the furnishings,
The lamps, for instance.
yeah, for instance.
Wow.
Did the Rijksmuseum maybe keep those or any idea?
I think some of his furniture is in the collection. Yeah, that's what, there's a woman that did a piece of.
Claim to have it all.
Would you flash about that if you have a chance?
I don't know if I can afford to, I think those are very expensive.
Gert, you visited Frans Haks here.
Yeah, I interviewed him.
Reporter.
Yeah. I used to write a series of interviews for Archeologie and interieur, so Roman interior, which were always talks between two designers or two people from the art or design world. And so I interviewed Frans Haks together with Hella Jongerius, and later on Frans Haks together with Bini Maas. I actually, I just before I came here, I decided like, oh, I need to look them up. They're from, let me see, from 2001. And I can tell you something of what he was talking about his house. I have to translate it on the spot. So, he said, the question was, can you tell me something about your house? And he said, I wanted a theatrical workspace with as big as possible contrasts. The one half is without any windows and can be closed with a big projection screen. The space behind it is has a glass roof, and it has a bathtub that you can use as a little pond. On both sides there are two stairways that run to the second floor. The kitchen and the dining room are upstairs, and that's where my boyfriend Johan rules. The design is by Mendini, and the colors come from the system that Peter Struiken designed for the front of the museum. It was my intention to create an ambience in which art in the traditional sense is completely irrelevant. So really, that picture hanging there from Ines van Lamsweerde should go as well. And then I say, what about the sofa? Should that go as well? No, that's the other passion of mine, to reactualize old styles. This is a Biedermeier sofa from 1830. It fits here very well. In our house in Groningen, we had a lot of different styles, and especially the table culture was very important. We saw that as a necessary tool for good hostmanship. If you have guests all the time, you at least want to lay a table with different china every time they come. And then he said the separation between art and design I find completely nonsense. This little stool that you're sitting on, that's by Sotsas. I think it's a sculpture, and you just happen to be sitting on it. And the same like a nice little coffee cup is a sculpture from which you can drink. And then that was the Hella interview. And then funnily enough, just to do a brief one from the Bini Maas one, they were talking about the Rijksmuseum. I'm surprised that he left it to the Rijksmuseum, because the question was, do you want to be the, would you like to be director of the Rijksmuseum or the Stedelijk Museum? And he said, oh, none of them. They're terrible. They're way too big for me as well. I like a smaller scale. I managed a museum on a smaller scale, and I'm now completely mutated. I find writing and advising companies much more interesting. And I never want to deal again with the government. I get spots everywhere when I see a politician. And then Bini Maas said, oh, that's a shame, because it would be great if you could advise politicians about the future of musea. I think they should clean up the whole mess that museums are. And then Frans says, absolutely. My vision is that 80% of the museum should close. He's elevating the wish now. They should put everything in big storages, and they should start like 4 big kunsthallen somewhere around the Netherlands, with a good director, a good curator, who can do all sorts of interesting shows there. They can get things from abroad, because I am absolutely against the current nationalism in art. If everybody keeps shouting how amazing Rembrandt and Vermeer are, then you might as well get a show by Mendini here. You're going to see something then. Vini di Massa, then, well, maybe they can tear down the State Museum and put a few high rises for living there. And in France, great, that's a good idea. Instead of having that terrible Caesar build a new wing for them, because that was built. Minima says, oh, I fall asleep when I see Caesar. And France says, oh, and the Van Gogh Museum with that horrible Faust built on. That should go. There's something. Anyway, the Rijksmuseum is a crying shame. They're really working on the square millimeter, trying to see if they can buy another silly little drawing from Rembrandt. Internationally, it's completely irrelevant. The historical department has not one reason to exist. Who wants to know anything about history might as well read a book. But please, please don't show one of Olde Barneveld's teeth or the pipe that Jan Steen used. They've got rooms and rooms full of shit. That's what it actually means. And so when he gave that to them,
They got rid of it.
yeah, that's too much.
No, we don't want it. Sell it. Yeah.
That's a nice moment.
Shall we have a look?
Paul, you can people.
Yeah, you can. Just try to be mindful of how many people are on it, and then please just don't go to the apartment upstairs.